Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're heading deep into the lonely heart of Texas, where the nights stretch on forever, and being alone can be the most dangerous thing of all. From ghostly figures waiting on empty back roads to whispers in the dark that were never meant to be heard, get ready for 5 disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you think twice about being alone after dark. But before we dive in, here's something strange. Most viewers make one chilling mistake. They leave without subscribing, and when they do, they miss out on the scariest, most bone-chilling stories that only the bravest can handle. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight is just the beginning and the real terror is still lurking out there, waiting. Also, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments, because here, the night is only getting darker and the horror is just getting started. Now turn down the lights, check your locks, and let's slip into the shadows. This is 5 disturbing true Texas alone at night horror stories. In the endless stretch of the Texas borderlands, where the land lay flat beneath a sky perpetually thickened by dusk, there exists a place where the Rio Grande, that ancient river of mystery and silence, carves its way through the desolation with a subtle malice. The river, whose murmurings had long since ceased to be considered mere whispers of nature, seemed instead to carry with it the voice of something that should not be. Here, the winds that stir the dust and tumbleweed are not mere breezes. They are emissaries of a strange and palpable terror. Carl Dunford, a solitary figure in the far-reaching wastes, had often found himself passing through this forsaken region, burdened by his endless and monotonous route as a trucker. He had driven this stretch of road 100 times, perhaps more, but never at night. It was a decision born of an instinct that no amount of rationality could explain. And yet, on this particular evening, there he was, stopping at the edge of the Rio Grande at the hour when night thickens and the world falls into an almost oppressive stillness. His truck, an aging behemoth of machinery, groaned as if reluctant to continue the journey. The engine, strained by the weight of the night itself, sputtered and coughed before finally choking into a silence that mirrored the dead stillness of the land. Carl cursed under his breath and slammed the steering wheel. The engine was cold and indifferent, its mechanical life extinguished by an unseen hand. He stepped out of the truck, the harshness of the hot Texas air clawing at his skin, and made his way toward the river. The waters below were black, devoid of any sign of life. No moonlight glinted upon its surface, no ripples disturbed the glassy calm. The night around him seemed to stretch and expand like a vacuum, consuming any sound, any sensation, until only the presence of the land and the river remained. It was then that the whispers began. At first, they were almost imperceptible, mere rustlings in the air like the faint brushing of dry leaves against the skin. Carl stopped in his tracks, unease creeping up his spine. He turned his head, searching the empty land, but saw nothing. Nothing at all but the vast expanse of nothingness. The whispers grew louder, each word indistinguishable, their origins impossible to trace. They seemed to curl and writhe through the air, bending it in ways that defied reason. The wind, if indeed it could still be called wind, began to carry those voices, insistent and foreign, as though they came from the very depths of the earth. Carl felt a sudden shiver run down his back, the hairs on his neck standing on end. He dared not look back at the desolate road, the dark, empty plains that seemed to close in around him with every passing moment. He dared not think of the truck behind him or of the vast void stretching before him. There was something about the place, a deep, pervasive, and unspoken wrongness that rooted him to the spot as if the land itself sought to claim him. And then, as his senses grew heavier with each passing second, Carl turned his head ever so slowly and saw it. It rose from the Rio Grande, slowly, deliberately, its form taking shape as though it had been summoned by the very land itself. The creature, if it could be called such, was a thing beyond any understanding, a serpentine mass that slithered from the river with unnatural grace. Its body was an oily, shimmering black, coiling and undulating in the air as though it were a living shadow, its movements both alien and ancient. Its eyes, two glowing orbs, hung suspended in the air, staring at him with an intelligence that surpassed human comprehension. They were eyes that seemed to belong to something older than time itself, something far beyond the feeble limitations of mortal existence. The whispers intensified into a maddening cacophony, a discordant chorus of unintelligible voices that filled Carl's ears with a pressure so overwhelming that it seemed to press against his very mind. The cries, the words, if they could be called words, grew louder, more insistent, more frantic, each syllable scraping across his psyche like 1,000 knives. The sound was deafening, suffocating, as though the world itself was being torn apart. Carl tried to move, but his body refused to obey. His legs were rooted to the earth, his feet planted in the gravel as if some unseen force held him in place. His breath quickened, his heart racing in his chest as the serpentine form continued to rise from the river, its glowing eyes never leaving him. It was upon him now, its massive, undulating form filling his vision, blotting out the stars, the sky, the very world around him. The air became thick with an unnatural pressure, a presence that filled every inch of space with the knowledge that something monstrous, something unnameable, was watching him. Carl's mind began to fracture, his thoughts splintering as the whispers rose into an unbearable crescendo. And then, as if it had never been there at all, the world went silent. The river's surface remained still. The whispers vanished. The creature, if it had ever truly existed, was gone. All that remained was the faintest ripple upon the water and the broken fragments of Carl's sanity. He never cried out, never struggled. He simply vanished, consumed by the night, swallowed by the unseen forces that thrived in the borders of the world, leaving nothing but the heavy silence of the Rio Grande and the flickering stars above. His truck, still idling at the edge of the river, would remain there for days, an empty vessel, stranded in a place where the very air carried whispers too terrible to comprehend. And the river, deep and implacable, would continue its endless flow, keeping its secrets as it always had, its voices ever whispering in the wind, waiting for the next soul brave enough, or foolish enough, to listen. There are vast and desolate places in the world, lands where the very essence of time seems to fold in on itself, as though the earth itself has forgotten the passage of days. The Texas plains, in particular, hold within them many such places, where night creeps not with the familiar embrace of darkness, but with an unsettling, otherworldly weight. In these lonely expanses where the horizon vanishes into the void, there is one such place, Llano Estacado, a name whispered among locals with a tremor of unease, a name that carries with it an ancient malice, an ancient memory. It was on a cold autumn evening, the air crisp with the bite of approaching winter, that Jared Connors, a ranch hand by trade and a solitary soul by nature, found himself making his way back to his family's farm after a long and grueling day. The tires of his old, battered truck crunched against the earth as he navigated the endless stretch of road that led through the desolation. Far in the distance, the warm glow of his farmhouse's lights offered a faint and fleeting comfort. It was a comfort, however, that only served to highlight the vast, oppressive isolation of the land that surrounded him. The flat, barren expanse seemed to stretch on forever, as though the very landscape itself had forgotten the contours of the world. As he approached Llano Estacado, Something unfathomable, shifted in the air. The wind stilled, as though all life had abandoned the plains in an instant. And then, without warning, the engine of Jared's truck began to sputter and die, as though the very heart of the vehicle had been stilled by some unseen force. He cursed under his breath, his hands instinctively gripping the wheel tighter as he tried to restart the engine. But it was futile. The truck's dying sputters were the only sound in the unnatural silence that enveloped him. A cold, creeping chill seemed to descend upon the land, as though some invisible hand had drawn the temperature downward. Jared felt it first at the base of his spine, an oppressive weight, a pressure that seemed to settle deep in his bones. He reached for his phone, hoping for a signal, but it was useless. The device blinked impotently, offering him no comfort in the wilderness. He stepped out of the truck and gazed around, hoping to spot some sign of life, anything to break the isolation. But the land was dead, its vast expanse a yawning abyss under the shadow of the night. There was nothing but the eerie stillness, the kind that presses against the soul and chills the marrow. And then he saw them. At first, it was but a flicker in the corner of his eye, a slight movement in the shadows just beyond the reach of his headlights. But as the seconds dragged on, those flickers grew stronger, more pronounced. The shadows, like a whisper on the edge of his vision, moved against the wind. He blinked, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, they were real. They moved with an unnerving purpose, shifting and warping in ways that defied the natural order. They were not simply shadows cast by his truck or the sparse, gnarled trees around him. These shadows were alive, conscious, as though the very land itself had become sentient and sought to consume him. A sense of foreboding settled into Jared's chest, tightening like an iron vice. His eyes darted nervously to the sky above. The stars, they were wrong. Their positions in the sky were not as they should be. They twinkled with a fevered, unnatural intensity, as though they were not stars at all, but distant, watching eyes blinking and shifting, rearranging themselves in patterns too complex, too impossible for any mind to comprehend. The sky itself, that ancient canvas, had turned against him. Jared stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest, panic beginning to claw at the edges of his sanity. His breath came in ragged gasps as the shadows moved closer, bending and twisting, forming shapes that were not meant for human eyes. What he saw then was too grotesque to be described with the mere limitations of language. Horrific, misshapen entities, their bodies mere suggestions of life, hanging in the air like rotting carcasses caught in the wind. Their eyes, black and hollow, were bottomless voids, eyes that seemed to stretch on for eternity, eyes that reflected nothing but emptiness, a darkness older than the earth itself. The whispers began then, soft at first, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. But soon they grew louder, more insistent. They came from all directions, as if the very land around him was speaking. No, screaming, secrets that were never meant to be known. The whispers spoke of things buried deep beneath the earth, things that slumbered in the darkness long before humanity ever set foot on the plains, things that waited with an unholy patience for the moment when the earth itself would reveal them once more. They spoke of horrors beyond the stars, of forgotten gods and primal beings whose very existence defied the laws of nature. Jared's mind began to fracture under the weight of those voices, the knowledge they imparted pushing him to the very brink of madness. His knees buckled beneath him as he tried to scream, but no sound came. His throat was dry, constricted by terror, as the shadows closed in, engulfing him with a presence that seemed to pull the very air from his lungs. His vision blurred, and the ground beneath him began to tremble, as though something deep beneath the earth was stirring, awakening, and then, with a sound that was not a sound at all. No scream, no cry, no warning, Jared vanished into the earth. The ground cracked open beneath him, wide and hungry, as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. His body was consumed, swallowed whole, leaving no trace but a faint, final tremor in the earth. In the cold, oppressive silence that followed, the stars above blinked and shifted, rearranging themselves once again. The land of Llano Estacado remained unchanged, eternal, indifferent to the fate of the lone ranch hand who had dared to traverse its cursed expanse. The whispers, however, continued on, carried by the wind, unseen voices in the night, waiting for the next soul to wander too far into the void. There are places vast and lonely, scattered across the desolate expanse of Texas, where the land swallows all sound, and time itself seems reluctant to unfold. Highway 90, winding through the barren desert, is one such place, an endless ribbon of asphalt that stretches into the oblivion of the horizon, weaving its way through ghostly, forgotten towns and beneath the shadows of ancient, gnarled trees that have borne witness to 1,000 secrets buried by time. There is a stretch of this highway, a desolate and forsaken place where strange things occur, where the land itself seems to carry the weight of unspeakable horrors, long hidden from human eyes. In the dead of night, when the moon shies away behind veils of cloud, a wailing can be heard, a sound that resonates with the very marrow of the soul, a cry that twists the very fabric of reality. It is said that this haunting cry originates from an old, unseen car, its engine roaring like a beast from some forgotten era. But the car is no more than a phantom, its existence a mere whisper in the wind, a chilling legend that all the old-timers know, but none dare speak of too loudly. It is the sound of an inevitable tragedy, of a violent death that refuses to die, repeating itself endlessly on moonless nights. Victor Eastwood, a night shift mechanic who had grown accustomed to the monotony of long drives and sleepless hours, had heard the stories. He had dismissed them as the drunken ramblings of old men, foolish tales passed down by superstition and the isolation of rural life. But on the evening that would alter the course of his life forever, he found himself driving home through that very stretch of Highway 90. The night was thick with a kind of oppressive quiet, the air heavy with an unspoken weight, as if something unseen waited, watching him from the desert's edge. The road ahead of him seemed endless, and his headlights cast long, trembling shadows across the barren landscape. There was something unnerving about the stillness, something that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. It was then that he heard it, the roar. At first, it was distant, faint, like the growl of a car engine struggling to turn over in the depths of some far-off place. But it grew louder and louder still, swelling with an intensity that drowned out all other sounds, until the very air seemed to vibrate with it. Victor's hands tightened around the steering wheel as he instinctively glanced into his rearview mirror, his heart beginning to race. The mirror revealed nothing but the black emptiness of the desert, a void that stretched to infinity. He checked his side mirrors, but they too were empty. The roar continued, a deafening sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He slowed the car, confusion gripping him. The road was empty. There were no cars, no lights, just the cold desert night. Yet the roar did not cease. It intensified, coming from behind him, a ghostly engine that surged ever closer. Fear coiled in his gut as he slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching against the asphalt in a desperate attempt to halt the encroaching sound. He glanced nervously to the front once again. And then he saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead, a pale shape that staggered forward with a gait unnatural and lurching. Its movements were jerky, as though it was not entirely bound by the laws of human anatomy. It was a thing that should not have been, a grotesque mockery of life. Its form was blurred, indistinct, its features hidden beneath layers of disfigurement. The figure had no face, or rather, it had a face so horrific and featureless that it seemed as though it had been scraped clean of all definition, leaving only a smooth, unbroken mask of flesh. The temperature dropped with a suddenness that took Victor's breath away. The very air around him grew cold and thick, as if the desert itself had turned against him. The wailing grew louder then, more desperate, a shrill, tortured cry that pierced the night like 1,000 broken voices. It came from the figure, from the car, from the earth itself, an unholy scream that seemed to tear at the very fabric of time, as if the past and present were collapsing in on one another. Victor's pulse thundered in his ears as the figure drew closer, its head snapping in his direction, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, empty pits that reflected nothing but a bottomless void. The air around him thickened, suffocating as the car's wail became all-consuming. His breath caught in his throat as he looked away for a split second, only to glance back and find the figure standing right before his headlights, its body mere inches from the front of his car. With an agonizing, inhuman shriek, the figure lunged toward him, its twisted form crashing into the hood of the car, shattering the stillness of the night. Victor's heart stopped in his chest as the world seemed to fall away beneath him. His eyes widened in terror as the headlights flickered and his engine sputtered to a halt. The scream, the wail echoed through the night, louder than any sound he had ever heard, a wail that transcended human understanding. In that moment, everything around him went dark, his vision blurred, his senses overloaded with the shriek of the phantom car, the grotesque figure now gone as if it had never been. Victor's body trembled, his mind shattered by the impossible reality of what he had just witnessed. His hands fumbled for the door, desperate to flee, but his limbs were frozen, paralyzed by the terror that had seized him. When he finally regained control of himself, the world had stilled again. The night was quiet, unnervingly so. The desert had returned to its deep, oppressive silence. The car, the figure, the wailing, all had disappeared, leaving nothing but the echo of its horrors reverberating in his skull. Victor stumbled from the car, his mind adrift in a fog of disbelief. He was alone in the middle of the highway, the distant stars shining cold and indifferent above him. But still, the wailing continued. It rang in his ears, a constant, maddening cry that would not cease. The memory of the disfigured figure, the screeching engine, and the unbearable wail would haunt him long after he left the stretch of Highway 90. And the night? It would remember too. It would remember that which should never have been seen, that which should never have been heard. For the wailing car, the phantom figure, was but a part of something far older, far darker, something that waited eternally for the next victim to cross its path on that forsaken highway. Marfa, a town buried beneath the weight of its own mysteries, sits like a dark stain upon the heart of the Texas desert. The wind, fierce and unrelenting, howls through the vast emptiness, carrying with it a silence so profound that the very landscape seems to absorb all sound, as if the land itself were complicit in hiding unspeakable secrets. But it is the Marfa lights, those ghostly orbs that hover above the desert plains, that have drawn the attention of the curious, the skeptical, and the foolhardy alike. No one truly understands what they are, and fewer still can comprehend the horrors that lie hidden behind their erratic dance. It is said that those who dare approach too closely will see not just the lights, but the darkness they conceal, an unfathomable evil that stretches back to a time when the earth was still young, and the stars themselves whispered secrets into the winds. Harry Dunslow, a scientist of no small renown, arrived in Marfa with a singular purpose: to uncover the truth behind the lights. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight, a journal, and an unwavering belief in the rational, Harry dismissed the countless tales spun by superstitious townsfolk as the ramblings of the uninformed. Science, he believed, could explain everything, but the moment he set foot in the desolate expanse of the desert, he knew, deep within the marrow of his bones, that there was something wrong here. The air felt thick, as though the very atmosphere clung to him with an unnatural force, pressing in from all sides, suffocating him with its weight. That first night, the lights appeared on the horizon, distant, flickering orbs that danced erratically across the barren desert. At first, Harry had been intrigued, his scientific curiosity piqued by their erratic movement. The lights hovered and swirled in ways that defied any logical explanation, sometimes drifting slowly, other times darting across the sky in sudden, jerking motions, as though they were alive. He adjusted the straps on his backpack and, with the same methodical detachment that had driven his career, began to trek toward the lights, certain that rational observation would soon reveal their true nature. But as he ventured deeper into the desert, something began to gnaw at him, a creeping sensation, as if the desert itself were watching, waiting. The wind whispered in strange, guttural tones, and Harry, though he would never admit it to another soul, felt an icy shiver creep up his spine. His flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, seemed to flicker and sputter, as if resisting the oppressive weight of the night. He pressed on, driven by a need to understand, but with each step, the world around him seemed to grow more distorted, as if reality itself were beginning to unravel. It was then that he heard it, the hollow echo of a voice. Soft at first, like the faintest whisper carried on the breeze, but it grew louder, sharper, until it reverberated through his skull like the ringing of a bell. The words were unintelligible, alien, as though they came from a place beyond human comprehension. Harry's heart quickened, but he steeled himself against the creeping dread that threatened to overwhelm him. "It's just the wind," he told himself, "just the desert's natural sounds playing tricks on me." But the whispering continued, its tones growing more distinct with each passing moment. And then, just as he thought he might break, the whisper turned into a voice, a hollow, echoing voice that seemed to reverberate from deep beneath the earth. "They are not from here," the voice whispered. "They have come and they will take you." Harry's pulse quickened, his breath shallow and quick. He spun around, his flashlight darting in every direction, but the desert was still, silent once more. His heart thudded in his chest, but he was not alone. He felt it then. The air around him was not the same. It had thickened, becoming heavy, oppressive, as if the very earth were holding its breath in anticipation. The lights, once distant, now hovered much closer, so close, in fact, that Harry could feel their strange pull. They flickered and swirled in eerie patterns as though they were alive, and their glow now seemed to pulse with a deep, unearthly rhythm. It was at that moment that Harry began to hear the other whispers, louder now, more distinct, not from the lights themselves, but from somewhere beneath the ground, from the depths of the desert. The whispers were not in any language Harry could recognize, but their intent was clear. They knew him. They had always known him. The words, dark and incomprehensible, spoke of something ancient, something buried deep beneath the sands, something that had been waiting for millennia, lying in wait for the foolish to come too close. He staggered backward, the light in his hand shaking violently as he spun in all directions. The whispers were no longer just whispers, they were becoming cries, urgent, frantic, as though a vast and terrible force was rising from beneath the earth. In a frenzy, Harry began to run, his heart thundering in his chest, his mind spinning with visions of an ancient cult, of unspeakable rites performed in the name of gods long forgotten, and of a terror buried beneath the earth that refused to stay buried. But the desert itself seemed to close in on him, the ground shifting beneath his feet, as if the very earth itself were conspiring against him. The lights danced around him, taunting him, drawing closer and closer until they seemed to encompass him in a web of unearthly light. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled, his legs giving way beneath him, his mind unraveling under the weight of the horrors that surrounded him. And then, just as he thought he could bear it no longer, there was silence, an oppressive, suffocating silence that seemed to press in from all sides. The lights were gone. The whispers had ceased. The desert was still, as if nothing had ever happened. But Harry Dunsloe was never seen again. When searchers found his flashlight still glowing softly by the edge of the desert, there was no sign of Harry. The only trace left of him was a single disturbing detail, a set of footprints that led from the flashlight into the empty expanse of the desert, only to disappear without a trace. And as they looked up, they saw the lights again, this time crimson and pulsing, hanging in the air above the spot where Harry had vanished. Some say the lights are a warning, others believe they are a call to something far older, far darker than any human mind can comprehend. But all agree on one thing. In Marfa, in the heart of the desert, there is a terror that waits, a terror that is far more ancient than time itself. The lights, the whispers, the echoes, they are but a glimpse into a horror that lies buried beneath the sands, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to venture too close. It was on a night as thick and oppressive as the very earth beneath him that Clay Harris, a solitary rancher by trade, began to notice the unnatural shift in the air as he made his way home from the cattle auction. The Texas plains, always wide and unforgiving, stretched out before him in their characteristic bleakness. But this night felt different. The atmosphere heavy with the weight of 1,000 unseen forces pressed against him as if it were a living thing, slowly suffocating the space around him. At first, it was subtle, a mere flicker of the stars above, like an errant breath from some far-off world, perhaps a trick of the wind or a flicker in the corner of his vision. But as he pressed on, nearing his small ranch near San Angelo, the sky began to change, becoming unnatural. The light from the heavens now stifled, choked by an overwhelming blackness that swallowed the horizon whole. What had initially appeared as a gathering storm lacked the comforting weight of clouds. It was merely a rolling, inky void, spreading across the sky with a purposeful, deliberate slowness. The stars themselves appeared distorted, as if twisted into unrecognizable shapes, twinkling with an unnatural intensity, like eyes that watched him. The wind, which had been still for most of the evening, stirred suddenly, its unnatural coolness biting at the skin, sending a shiver through Clay's spine. Something was wrong as he drove further along the rough, desolate road. The air around him thickened, pressing down on him from all sides like a growing weight. And then, from the blackened heavens above, something began to fall. A shower of sparks that ignited the earth below. The ground crackled with a terrible, unholy fire, as if the very soil had been scorched by the touch of something otherworldly. But what came from the fire was far worse than the flames themselves. A shape, no, a thing, rose from the charred earth, formless and vast, its presence overwhelming in its sheer alien nature. It defied the natural order, its very existence an affront to logic and reason. The air itself seemed to recoil from it, bending and warping as though the laws of physics themselves had been shattered by its arrival. The creature, a writhing mass of darkness and fire, towered over Clay, its towering figure an amalgamation of all that should not be. Its appendages, vast and twisted, reached toward him, each movement an unnatural, horrifying mockery of life. As it drew closer, Clay's vision began to blur, his mind unraveling at the sheer horror of the thing before him. He could feel his sense of self slipping away, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a wind that should not exist, as though the very concept of his existence had become irrelevant in the face of such impossibility. And then, as the creature's mass loomed directly before him, he saw something far worse. a grotesque mass of faces, faces writhing within the creature's form, each one twisted in eternal agony, each face locked in an expression of silent, pleading terror. Silent screams echoed from within the creature, reaching into his soul, shattering the fragile barrier of sanity that separated man from the unknowable vastness of the cosmos. The creature spoke, though its voice was not like any voice Clay had ever heard. It sounded as though it came from beyond time itself, an ancient, endless wail that carried with it the weight of millennia of suffering. The very essence of the sound, a low, reverberating hum, crawled beneath his skin, poisoning his thoughts. And in that moment, Clay understood. The earth was not his home. It had never been. It was a fleeting presence, a brief and insignificant blip in the great and terrifying expanse of the universe. A universe filled with horrors too vast, too incomprehensible for the human mind to even begin to grasp. The weight of this knowledge crashed down upon him, a crushing burden of terror so profound that his body could not withstand it. His lungs screamed for air, but his breath would not come. His heart thudded wildly in his chest, but he could feel it beating in rhythm with the creature's undulating mass. And then the void took him, with a final broken scream, a sound lost in the vast, cold emptiness. Clay Harris vanished. His ranch was left untouched, his truck abandoned on the side of the road. But the land was never the same. The stars no longer twinkled with their former warmth, and the blackened skies above San Angelo remained ever thick with a dread that would never fade. His disappearance was but a reminder that the world above them, the world they thought they understood, was not what it seemed. For there were things beyond their comprehension, things that slumbered beneath the earth and among the stars, and the earth was only the briefest of stops on their endless, indifferent journey. The ranchers and travelers who would come through the area after him would sometimes speak of strange sights, of fleeting shadows moving in the blackened skies above San Angelo, and of whispers in the wind that spoke of something ancient, something that waited. Yet no one ever spoke of them for long, for the memory of Clay Harris, lost to the void, lingered in the air like a fading dream, and as the stars twinkled like distant eyes, they seemed to watch with an eternal gaze, a gaze that would never leave the land, nor its inhabitants to find peace.